Hi, welcome to Watercolor Drama for Sketchers. I'm Laurie Richards and I've put together a series of tutorials, all of which deal with the different things to consider when you want to bring more drama, more life, more action, more energy to your sketch. So I've boiled it down to about 6 things that I think about all the time. When I'm approaching a new view, a new subject, I'm out in the streets, I end up looking at what has caught my attention through these 6 different lenses. So what are they? The first one is focal point. Obviously, it's the most common that we all talk about, is to make sure that there is something that drew your attention, that you're excited about, you want to sketch, and all that energy will show. If you're not interested in anything you see, don't sketch. It's hard to generate drama and life and interest on something that doesn't touch you. So presumably something has touched you. That's your focal point. And the challenge is to make sure that becomes the focal point of the sketch itself. Therefore, don't forget it as you go forth and you add things and you draw more and you start to paint. Don't forget the focal point. And it is much more interesting if your focal point is not dead center. So artists talk about the quadrants and all that, but basically what it boils down to, in my opinion, is to put it off center, whether a little high, a little low, a little to the right, a little to the left. Put it off center. But remember what your focal point is so that you can emphasize it as you do your sketch. Okay, the second thing is, and it's related to the first, is simplify. Your focal point is what you really want to put all your energy into, and therefore what's around it, behind it, near it, also in your view, you may want to include for context, but try simplifying all of that so that you do give enough context so that it makes sense, but that you don't distract from your focal point. So simplify, be willing to leave things out. Okay. The next thing that brings drama are the shadows and the reflected light. If your subject is outside and there's sun, then obviously you have an opportunity to check where are the dramatic lights and darks of what you're interested in. If there is no sun or there are no dramatic lights and darks, I suggest that you add them, make them up. Decide what direction the sun is coming from, and make it up. Be consistent, of course, so it's believable. But those lights and darks will bring a lot of drama to your sketch. Okay, the next are diagonals. For some reason, the way our eyes work, diagonals are energy. And so avoid putting anything straight horizontal. If it's a street scene, go to one side so that your street line is some kind of diagonal. You will find that that brings a lot more energy and interest to your sketch. Also, diagonals can be used to point to your focal point, whether it's a diagonal row of trees or seeds or a coffee cup and then a bottle, or taking your eye toward the main event. Whatever it is, excuse me, diagonals are very dramatic. Okay, the 5th, close-up. Bring your focal point as close as you can in your composition. If it's really in your face, sometimes the drama is accentuated. It has more life. The viewer and you can see it better. So make that decision as you go along. Can it be brought a lot more close? And lastly are borders. Since white is very important in watercolor sketches, the borders are also a good opportunity to keep it lighter, to frame it, to make it more interesting. So whether it's a normal rectangle, an irregular shape, doesn't matter, but consider your borders as part of your composition. Okay, so let's look at some photos and some sketches and use them as an opportunity to see what's happening in terms of composition. And after that, we'll do a sketch. In fact, we'll do the view that I'm looking at right here from my chair, and I look at it every day. And so we'll do that sketch as we talk about the composition choices we make. Okay, so here is a photo I took on my last visit to Guanajuato, Mexico, and I was struck by the lives that these two women must live and how different they must be. And that's what I wanted to represent in my sketch. There's a lot in this view that is irrelevant, so I know I have to leave a lot of things out, and perhaps I have to make it more evident what my focal point is. Here's the sketch I did. Obviously, I left lots out. There are many diagonals, including the lineup of burrows and the wall behind the woman sitting on the ground, also the diagonal on her pail, and the large diagonal which tried to include the two women. That's how I used the techniques we talked about to create that sketch. Here's a view of one of the terraces at our house, and I loved the shadows. I was very attracted to what the chair did and the white against the dark background. However, the problem was the rest of the scene is pretty unattractive, and I had no interest in it. So then the question was what to do about that, and I thought of the various principles we've been talking about. So I moved around to a different angle, and in this case I got closer and I got a much stronger view of the shadows, not only of the chair but of the wonderful pot that's next to it and the pot that's in the upper right hand corner. I felt this was a much better composition and much more dramatic. So that shows moving around and finding the angle can be extremely helpful. Here's Buen Dia Cafe, where I used to go every morning for breakfast before we were self-quarantined. This woman was so enjoying the sun, and I wanted her to be my focal point. There are lots of diagonals and shadows and lights. The issue was that I was actually quite far away, and so I felt she was too small, and there were other distracting features. So I had to decide what to do about that. So bringing the whole object much closer helped tremendously. I'm not sure if I'm going to include the man. The woman is off-center, which I think is very effective. I will not include the heater, which is to the left of the man. But overall, I think this is a very dramatic composition for a really fun sketch. So here's the view that I'm looking at right now from my desk. It's the San Antonio Church. I love the way it's sort of on the top of the first mound of hills. And it's very white, and when the sun is brightly against it, it's very dramatic. This view, however, is a little confusing. There's a lot happening, so I know I need to do something to make it a little more effective. So here, bringing it closer helps. I got rid of the vegetation that's in front, and I'm going to use this frangipani tree to sort of frame around the church. The church itself, I think, stands out nicely against the darker hill behind it, but I'm going to have to probably remove a lot of the buildings and other things to make it more dramatic. Okay, so here is the final sketch based on the compositional questions that we've just talked about and the tips and ideas. You may notice a couple of things. I got rid of the vegetation here, brought everything up close, put the church off center, and I'm using the tree to frame the church. And then, as you can see, these lines of diagonals for the hillside are trying to increase the sense of diagonals. The other thing I did was add some suggestion of buildings, but mostly those that are pointing toward the church, and it's just a suggestion. Finally, you may notice that some of this is in pencil and some of it is in pen, in ink. And I often do that when there are certain edges I want to have be very clear and sharp, and other edges, like right around the church, that silhouette is extremely important, and then this sense of framing it with the tree. However, the hillsides, they can sort of blend one into another, and they're not nearly so critical, and I don't want to draw attention to them with sharp black lines. Where the sun hits the top of this wall, yes, that would be a sharp line. And then the same thing on the pot here. I decided to make a straight rectangular border. I felt it framed it well. So those are the compositional questions that we talked about. Okay, so let's paint this sketch. The first thing is to provide the first and major wash for all of the large shapes, and to do it with multi-color washes. Every time you get another brush load of color, it's a different color. That will help bring dynamic. We'll talk about all of these things much more in our later tutorials. You can fix lines and edges, which is what I was just doing. So having finished the hillside, we're working on the wall and trying to keep the top of the wall light, because that's where the sun would hit it. It also adds drama to have that light against the dark. I've switched to a smaller brush from the very large one I've used up until this point. This is an 8 round, and I'm putting in the details, trying to preserve the whites for the lighted or sun-struck parts of the tree. And every time I still go back and have a different color each time I go get more paint, so that everything is multicolored, and then you soften some edges. Doing the large tub on the bottom, again multicolored, but also making sure that I preserve the white on top of each board, because that's a dramatic highlight. When I do foliage, I usually start with yellow or a light azo green, and then just drop in some blues or greens to add contrast. Having finished the entire first wash, now it's time to go back after that has dried and add details, emphasize some shadows, adjust where something dark needs to be strengthened. Finally, adding some more foliage, some darker contrasts, trying to preserve the initial wash, the beauty of that, but adding some good contrast, especially around the church, which after all will make it more dramatic. Okay, so that's it for today. I hope you found this interesting. Our next tutorial, now that we've talked all about composition, will focus on watercolor techniques. It's using the watercolor medium itself in ways that make it dramatic. I hope I see you then. All the best. Stay safe.